No one in the neighborhood would understand those other men who have such cold-hearted children. Don Ernesto, 30 years old, lived in a mother's house. He owned it by old photos and memes. No one cared to look at anymore. He had worked his whole life building with his hands what others inherited without pay, only as a beggar. He was still angry with his children. When they saw him, they decided to leave him alone. They believed the old man wouldn't steal something else. They took their things, closed the door within the fence, and walked away. Without looking back, they didn't know the good. By good mark that beginning of a story would have for them. They tried. Don Ernesto lit a candle on the empty tire. He didn't cry. He simply made a prayer he repeated in Sebastian. Teach them the value of what can adhere. The new panda's small chest had reptilians in its floorboards for years. Inside rested all the Kiamans. Kissed! And a year later, the next year, to change the address. But his children didn't know that the man they despised had once been one of the founders of a company. See now? Billions. And he reclaimed anything. He preferred to lie hungry, watching from afar how many chained people. But that night, something inside him decided it was time to teach them a lesson that time they had failed to deliver. 2 weeks later, in each of his children's miseries, a third as ill-led as they'd been their fathers and aunts. The message was simple. Now Ruanduz was to do something, and do something. So to assure us none of the imams and the centers would confound them, not only with the truth, but we themselves, Don Ernesto, is a street in the beginning with wells. But we sacrifice for the kinds Kohitsa, Makinikila small workshop, prayed in the children to whom I gave everything I could, a jacket, a shirt, a roof, and love, and never complained. Not even when life took his wife all too soon. But the years went by, and what was once a unity tending to distance, the children grew up, became important, and the old man became nothing, more than an inconvenience in their busy lives, full of empty promises. In his own way, the clactic too, and cruel. Slowness. Phone calls became rare, visits even rarer, until one day, the youngest suggested selling the house to save him from waste. Don Ernesto smiled sadly. It wasn't the first time that these guys did selfless convenience. They agreed in silence because there was something they still didn't know, said through. His father isn't measured by what he leaves behind, but by what he teaches. That same week, these children decided to live together, a band and his old man, too early. Enough to get by. Let us see what they do without us. They said, the things can be instead of them. Soon, but feed them truth. So about to teach them a lesson they would have frequented Manigault, and they would have known that. Before continue, invite this story that touches the heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like. If you believe there are still fathers who deserve to be an egg, and tell me in the comments from which country or city you're watching this video. Your support helps us continue sharing real stories that remind us that Manigault, Greta, Thun, and Faisaro is more than an inheritance. The day his children left, Thailand fell over the gulf like a heavy blanket. Don Ernesto stood. Beside the window, Guahuna Sea, Cartavoit, Ricina Clauda dusted along the road, and didn't cry. And Hisaje, there's no longer, said the papers. What he felt was a strange and sad relief and sorrow, like finally understanding that the love he had given had been misunderstood. On the table, 3 empty plates remained, leftovers from a dinner no one cared to share. That night, he made himself a strong coffee and sat in front of the portrait of his late wife, you see, Clara M. Maduera Lee. We raised them very hard, but the world taught them to count on calculators. He was Thailand for a moment before heading softly. Don't worry, there's still 1, 3, and 2. Tito's, and this time life itself will do the talking. He took the key to the small chest, hidden beneath the floorboards, and placed it on the table. This pest and loneliness began to feel like an old friend. Don Ernesto Ocapelli, Swat C, Patriopi, Tredax, and Dr. C, Cornishap, where a few neighbors still greeted him. No one knew that this man, with his elegance and attestation, kept a secret powerful enough to change everything. A headland lever to talk about money. It cost money when it falls into their own hands. Next thing, this is greeted to 1 afternoon his lawyer had discreetly entrusted him at McKay's visit. Are you sure about this? Don Ernesto, excessively, the old man, had a doubt of satisfaction more than any once my children turned to him. The value of emptiness. Only when they have nothing more they understand what they've truly lost, assigned to the ducky amends, sealing the envelopes without trembling. But the 10-man hand, meanwhile, in the city, his children lived, he owned it by left hand, and borrowed life choice. They thought about how peaceful their father's life must be now, an hour. Later, he came back, brought them, threw them to the undercutting one afternoon. The stubborn old man, he was probably old. He had forgotten about tools in a way. He was right. Don Ernesto had stopped waiting now. He was waiting for something greater. The right moment. That same week cannot be visited again when the time came. Do you want all the letters delivered? Don Ernesto smiled faintly. Yes, and made sure. Each one as if they're on the same day. He didn't want false tears. He wanted silence. He read and understood. The other man. The old man. The emotional drafter. Today, my children. 1. Cold July morning, Don Ernesto left home. He had fallen under his arm. He walked to the old train station, and he handed a sealed envelope to the postman. Inside of open paper, he declared it his. Abode, sacrificed, and the final decision. Believe it is when he's gone is as simply he cried nothing without asking questions. On his way back home, he stood in front of Don Ernesto's house and the scandal between him and Don. Ernesto's family, Lord, we just want them to understand it was bad. The flicking flame hit his dead face, and for a moment it seemed young. The old man wasn't asking for miracles. He was asking for just a sad soul, and he knew it was uncommon. Days later, Don Ernesto's health began to fade. The neighbors tried to help, but they insisted it was fine. Don't worry, he said with a peaceful smile. Soon everything will be in its place. Those who had understood by fear of his quiet farewell slept calmly, like someone who knows that even though the puzzle is final, it still belongs. When it finally passed away, the mailman kept his promise. 3 envelopes on the same Sunday, identified on terraces across the city. On the front it said, "To my children we say, la vida is due," and the same truth we do now say goodbye. All 3 froze. None of them even jumped behind the trepidation. In the toothed maiden's face there, the flag shone without masks. And so, while the echo of his theme faded in, the cemetery, the true legacy of Don Ernesto, had disappeared. The news of Don Ernesto and his disillusioned siblings could most certainly be feared. None of them dashed to attend the funeral, although anyway they did indifferently, as if his passing was just another formality. But the next day, when Don noticed, he called his kingdom to come in for a joint dinner, curious at the outweigh their guilt, what they had written on those letters carrying on her attempts. Only threw me in a small room lit by an old way. They said before a table they're still envelopes, tested neatly in place with a stallion voice. They said, "Your father is dead, he shall be ready," or late, in silence, without interrupting the others. The siblings' hands trembled, not from sorrow, but from an uneasiness. They called on the name. They held the stove, and his fist, inside was a note written in his father's steady hand. "To you, WHO police recognition, leave that." But his children, blinded by comfort, saw him. Affliction of your own pride, and leave you nothing, because you already had everything but the 2 notes you wasted, and the feminine name you never unveiled. The man clenched his fists, fighting the anger rising in his chest as it comes under his neck. To you, WHO believe money could solve everything and leave you the hardest debt to settle, your conscience, when you finally understand that Matilda, the old wealth, cannot feed the soul. You already know what truly holds, don't you? I felt silent, feeling a heavy ache spreading. Through his chest, the youngest, the daughter, was less. Her letter was different. To you, my little one, WHO once cared for me quietly while your brothers mocked my glances and leave you the key. Not to my house, but to my face in the basement. There is a chest. Don't open it, I'll tell you. Open it, I'll speak. Shiver, don't cry. She has already sealed my fate. The 3 children left from out of town for their first trip for years. Prey gave way to something far stronger change. When they left the office, the youngest went straight to the old femme man. The doctor cried to him and thus sent a bold and brave man. He embraced her. Everything was in his hand. He left it there, the girl, without any Fear, filled with peace, she went down to the basement. She went to open the key. Under an old blanket, she found a chest. She opened it and found three things: a black notebook, a sealed envelope, and a photograph of the four of them, taken many years ago. On the back of the photo, her father had written, "When a family breaks apart, forgiveness is the only thing that can meditate." Inside the envelope were notarized the key, amounts to shares in a company, investment, certificates and property titles set to download and everything they did with it. He used to undertake the inherited marketing and had been one of the founding partners of a company in our billions, but the money was not a true legacy. In the notebook, the old man had written his life's future and still appears the soldier. "My children took my whole life to give you the best, but he failed to teach you how to value what can't be seen. That is why he hid the fortune, because he wanted to see if you would laugh without expecting a lot. If you read it in this, it means that there is still time to change." So the close down of his last years, he didn't know where to call his brothers, but he did when they were young, so they stood before the chest, in silence for the first time. They did see themselves as heirs, but as children, and in that instant, something inside them began to break or perhaps to heal. They tried the youngest place on the bukanda table and lit a candle, just as his father used to do. Then now he understood. He raised his three held hands, and for a moment, the silence that once had become secret, it was. Then it was the beginning of a legacy, and money could never buy. The legacy of humility, forgiveness, and love that survived even after the death lied. The house felt large, yet whenever his discipline stood before the open chest in silence, none dared to touch the diamonds, and the waxes and waxes fell heavier and heavier with memories of sight. Their aim fell softly, tapping against the windows with a steady, almost ritual rhythm for the first time. The sound didn't evade them. It felt cleansing. "Why didn't he ever tell us?" asked the eldest, his voice breaking. The youngest, still holding the notebook, replied, quietly, "Because the new ones you all don't have." Understood. The 10ths left them speechless. They had grown up under the same roof, yet each of them that fell each another, Ron. Ernesto had given them everything, and all they had in the soul to pay for. Semida, the brother student, began pacing their own ceremony. "What now?" he muttered, though he divided what they said and did pretend, and nothing happened. The sister looked back, him calming. The 10ths, and that's what he wanted. If he'd do it, it would be left to his. The athletes, their words hanging down, they are like a verdict. Over the years, money has set the age of them all. When this time Seveku tried to help them into strangers, but that notebook, the piece of truth, written in ink and face, was forcing them to look inwards. The eldest, who had always believed himself in control, picked up that notebook, which he had toured a lot. Then it is to act wise to pay for their schooling. The first page spoke of their childhood love. How, of the days, he begged very surely, because it was all they had, and they were at the boundary of a thing. Money can bend back, their father had written, but respect on the lost takes a lifetime to return. The man closed that notebook when covered his face. No one had seen him cry since they were children. The youngest sister got him styled as he was one, as I said, from the eldest to the youngest in the family. For Chan, how especially they didn't remember. Merdegend, a line stood out. And the line, when life takes everything from you, remember that those who throne ill have you. Grotesque for explanations, they just simply hold your hand. That sentence broke them completely. They realized their father's true secret wasn't the hidden money, but the unshaken face he kept, even after being forgotten. "Be done." Sunlight streamed through the window. Illuminating the chest, the youngest took her property papers and laid them on the table. "These don't tell her own truth. She's her family. A deal to keep them to make use of, but to show us how much it costs to lose you never value." Her brothers nodded. It was time to do something different too, something the two daughters of the man who had in those islands. What words had failed to convey that same afternoon? They went to the lawyer and requested that all the money and properties they donated to a local foundation help the men and elders. In no time surprised Steve, they were sure. Yes, Zelda's reply ruined his name to help those who were forgotten. The strike was as they signed the papers. An unfamiliar feeling washed over them. It wasn't a sadness. It was relief, as if the weight of your head dissolved into a sharp breath. For the first time, they felt the arguing, matching, or calculating. They activated their guards. When they stepped out of the office, the rain began to fall again in soft, clean, almost like a blessing, and thus they obtained the serenity. Cecily finally understood that they had the inheritable fortune. They had inherited something far greater, the chance to be another. The fallow. In weeks were a whirlwind of emotions. The three siblings who for years had barely spoken began meeting every Sunday in the old house. There is the doubtable obligation. But doubtable, something inside them had changed. In that day, yes, of it. The echo of their father's words continued to guide, it can be said, like a voice no longer heard but still felt in every corner. The youngest sister suggested a name for the foundation. Ernesto, to Amir's home, always said no one should be alone, she explained, fighting backwards Zelda's tense middle brother. Nada for the festivity. They agreed without targeting. It was as if their father's spirit had reconciled them without a single word. With the money he had quickly saved, they barred the old mansion. In the center of the city, the distorted air painted a wall in its own colors and filled their rooms with light. Every picture, every piece of furniture was chosen fully. They wanted the delinquents to feel something they themselves had long forgotten to be. Affection as they went down the plaza varied. Memories began to surface. Zelda's, while her, in a photo of their father, the entrance. Memory he never thought he'd feel proud to say. His name again. The middle brother, looking out the window, replied there. Maybe this is how he forgives us. The festivities began soon after him and Endo, a man without families, forgotten by their own, just like Ernesto. Some tried and they sought in bed and a hot meal. Creeping in the way, she gathered in the new book. Thing. Remember, they're still alive. Little by little, the foundation became more than a tribute. The reclaimed living redemption. Since the siblings began discovering true worlds, sincere smiles, unexpected heights, stories that healed invisible wounds and divinized a man he slowly denounced. The piece they found was Paislas. One afternoon, a local journalist came to the story on the home, and that ended up there. The youngest stood at a ditch on the sandhill. Here, people don't come to die, they come to... In the end, it's why they had decided to dedicate their inheritance to something like this. Zelda's tense to show his attention, because everything we had before made us selfish. But to a true heritage, from our father gave us back our souls. That quote appears the next day, on the front page of a newspaper, and the second line, from inheritance to heart. Three siblings then came into hope. The story went viral. People across the city began donating food, medicine, and time. But a big girl could not support her illness. She came out of fear of life. One morning, the youngest sister sat down in a balloon on the sandhill. Inside was a torn page from their father's old notebook. It read, "If my children learn to live without expecting anything in return." Yeah, you know my Peppa sayings? It's fulfilled. She read it with a lump in her throat. No one knew who had sent it there, or how it got there. But the story agreed on one thing. The handwriting was unmistakably their father's. That night, they lit a candle in the chapel of the home, not to mourn his sons, but to thank him for his legacy. Outside, sirens began to fall again, as if the sky were repeating the same gesture from that night after all. The sound of the raindrops against the roof became their prayer. It went on long ahead. It was the same language their father had spoken, all along. The language of love that came throughout, shouting, "Fragilas de dovesente de men, en face de transforme." And in the blessed silence, they understood that Don Ernesto was a true millionaire. That wasn't in the gestures of Pepas, but in teaching them, through love, what it truly means to lie. 6 months yepes since the opening of the Ernesto Ramirez home. Every corner of the place breathed life. The walls, on the silence, now held left. Songs and shared prayers. The siblings took them scary for very few, but they did so without schedules, without ranks, almost as if the house itself had placed them all on equal ground. One morning, the young assistant heard of us and found a wooden box with a note attached. For you. When silence speaks again, there was no signature. Kizata donem I kept left ida. But something about the handwriting, Magad Webel, Chupanzabak, and found inside an envelope, an old medal, and that even engraved with the initial Sapir. She immediately called Jebedes. Selegede. The on the table is Chicofaliopad, the envelope, Yoskaletwe, the handwriting. Those likely Shagits. Kwasan mistekabal. It was from their father. Nala dem fudis pengawi Jebedis dem. Fusifti histes patledon. Nanidatu. They simply listened. My children, if this letter has found its way to you, it means you finally understood what it tried to teach. Itaba, Neve about money. Cornets, or pride. It was about the past. The world she left behind was standing here at hands. IT was a tool. The only you to use ITE to build something was more than your mistakes. It failed many times, but I'd never stop believing in you. If you ever lose your way, come back here to Dism and listen to the silence. In IT, you will find me, reminding you that love is only proven through trust. There's flood free. The second brother to Semadalan held Ite between his fingers. Ite was the same one their father had. Nepweksha, back. Fenty there was wise. A Huser swayed his heart Jebedes. That day, said he decided to hang Semadalan Setrans of Siom as a symbol of their father, Beloite. They placed a small plain text. Love is nothing here at Iti, the land. Everyone who entered up for a moment to read it, in silence. Over time, Sir Nestor Ramirizome became a symbol of compassion. People from far and wide came to offer help, or to reconnect with their own forgotten parents, Sepraje Kruvi and the Nissines, siblings. Hedi Megan, that day the few to turn it into business. Father totas de tuedes de danautabla is the soul, the youngest said softly. This is a life regained Ite, meaning cell dust. Anzi obsessed with Prafat, now Totras to Deldeli. The second, UHO, he spent his life chafing success, devoted himself to managing the foundation, Justitso Sisui Danasti. And the youngest, she became the soul of the home, a woman many began to call Sadotia Bol. One afternoon, as she walked through the garden, she saw another old man sitting under the rain, raising near the sky with a dental smile. I don't think you come in safe, Don Julio. She asked to reply calmly. Sometimes Seren carried his voice as Francis. That day, he had won. It is said it was proud of you. She froze, unable to respond, looking up at the sky, where the rain fell softly, almost like a sigh. She thought she saw a silhouette in the second floor window, and all the men with the same face, smiling in a way she knew by heart. She said nothing. She simply closed her eyes and let the rain wash over her face. In the distance, such a bell rang 3 times, and at that very moment, all 3 siblings sitting at different corner of the home felt the same peace move through them. Don Ernesto was no longer there, but his presence lived on, in the hands that gave without asking, in the eyes that looked with gratitude. In every gesture of love he had plenty, without expecting anything in return. The old man had not left behind a fortune. He had left something far more powerful. She said unto their humble hearts, even when forgotten, always tend up chained and wealthy. They say true stories. Don't tell vain, then do the heap of heavy after. But do it at least under 10 years. The story of Lucia and Andres was one of them, of 2 souls, who met by chance, or perhaps by destiny, in a city in case he was ever seen. She was searching for answers. He was searching for meaning. And without realizing it, there he came each other's sky. Andres learned that he could not tell him what to be, but by what he did. Lucia discovered then that even the hardest of him, chained and shown a lethal face, they never made drama about it. Yet they kept talking to the visitors, facing stares, glass masks, and the obscenities they sent at him, which he often administered. And so, through silences, prayers, and sincere gestures, they built something. If you truly understand the Alamo, from humility and redemption, because sometimes, only sometimes, in the most unexpected way, using vain to cleanse the soul, and then ordinary peasant, to transform an entire life,